3 years in a long-distance relationship believing he was saving so we could be together. The wife who didn't know I existed wrote to me one day, not to fight, but because she didn't know anything either. What we did together changed everything. There are lies that require infrastructure, that are not a moment of weakness or an omission that slipped through carelessly, but deliberate constructions that have moving parts and calendars and different versions of the same person inhabiting spaces that never touch. To sustain a lie of that scale, you need dedication. You need the kind of intelligence that in any other context would be admirable. And you need to treat the people who love you as scenery, as elements of a system that exists to satisfy what you need in each moment. I was scenery for 3 years. I found out because another woman had also been scenery for 7. And the difference between her and me was that she had 2 children with him. My name is Carolina. I am 34 years old. I am a freelance translator, and 11 months ago, the longest relationship I have had ended, and the most costly in every sense that is not economic. The man's name was Esteban. He was 38 years old. He was an infrastructure engineer. He had emigrated to Canada 4 years before I met him, according to what he told me, to build an economic base that would eventually allow him to have a more stable life. I met him at a wedding. He was visiting the country for 2 weeks. It was one of those connections that feel immediate, and that when the 2 weeks end and the person has to go back, leave you with the feeling that something was left incomplete. We started a long-distance relationship. 3 years of long-distance relationship. 3 years of video calls and messages and visits from him every 4 or 5 months that lasted 2 weeks, and that were always intense in the way that things are intense when time is limited and you know it is going to run out. 3 years of believing we were building towards something. The narrative Esteban maintained was coherent and detailed in the way that carefully constructed narratives are coherent and detailed. He worked on infrastructure projects with specific duration contracts. He was saving. He had a concrete plan to, in 2 more years, have enough to come back, or for me, to be able to go to Canada with a real economic base. He talked about apartments, neighborhoods, what life would be like when we were in the same place. I believed that plan because I had no reason not to believe it. He was a man who showed up when he said he was going to show up, who called, who visited, who remembered the details of my life and used them in conversation in a way that felt like genuine attention. He was, by every indicator I knew how to use, a present man within the real limitations of distance. The message arrived on a Wednesday morning. It was from an Instagram account I did not recognize. Profile photo of a woman with 2 small children, a name that meant nothing to me. The message said, "Hi Carolina. My name is Andrea. I am Esteban's wife. I need to talk to you, and I ask that you not let him know before we speak. I am not writing to attack you. I am writing because I think we both need to have a conversation." I read it 3 times. The 3rd time, I read it with a strange calm of someone whose brain already processed what it means in the first 2 seconds, and who on the 3rd reading is only verifying that the words say what they appear to say. I responded, "I am listening." Andrea was 36 years old. She had been married to Esteban for 7 years. They had 2 children, one 5 and one 3. She told me in the first message after I said I was listening, not as an attack, as information, with the precision of someone who has decided that what they need in that moment is clarity, and that clarity requires data before emotions. She told me she had found my name on Esteban's phone 3 weeks earlier, that she had looked at my profile, that what she had seen had left her no doubt that I was not a friend or a colleague. She told me she had not written immediately because she had needed time to process what she was discovering and to decide how she wanted to handle it. She told me she had decided to write to me because she believed I had the right to know what she knew, and that she wanted to know what I knew to have the complete picture. I told her everything, not all at once, in a conversation that lasted 2 hours through messages that went back and forth with the cadence of 2 people who are building together a puzzle that neither of them has complete. I told her how we had met, the narrative he had sustained, the visits, the plans. Everything I believed was our relationship. She listened. She asked specific questions, dates of visits, periods when he had been in the country. She crossed them with her own information. What came out of the crossing was the complete architecture of how Esteban had managed the two worlds. The weeks when he told me he had an intense project that left him no time to call were the weeks when Andrea told me he had been more present at home. The periods when he visited me corresponded with trips he had described to her as work in other cities within Canada. Every absence had a different explanation for each of us. It was an information management system built with the precision of someone who had been doing it long enough to have perfected it. Andrea asked if I would be willing to talk on a video call. I said yes. That video call was one of the most difficult and strangest experiences I have had. Seeing the face of the woman with whom you have been sharing, without knowing it, the man you thought you were building something with has a quality that no other experience I can compare has. There was no hostility. From the first second, it was clear that neither of us was the other's problem. The problem had a name, and that name was Esteban. We talked for 2 hours. Andrea was a direct and organized person who had clearly processed a significant part of her anger before contacting me, and who had come to that video call with a clear agenda. Understand the complete extent of what had been happening so she could make informed decisions about her own life. She asked me things I would have asked in her place. Whether there had been signs I had ignored, whether there were moments where something had not added up, whether he had ever talked about her. I told her the truth about everything. The signs that in retrospect had existed, but that at the time had explanations I had accepted. The moments where something had been slightly inconsistent and that I had filed away as the normal inconsistencies of any person. That he had never talked about her. That when I asked about his life in Canada beyond work, he talked about friends, the city, future projects, and that the absence of more detailed personal life I had interpreted as privacy and not as concealment. Andrea listened to everything. At the end, she told me something I did not forget. She told me what cost her the most was not the betrayal itself, that the betrayal was his, and said something about him that she was going to have to process for a long time. What cost her the most was that her children had a father who was capable of this. We decided together how to proceed, not with movie-style strategic coordination, but with the simple logic of two people who have information the other needs and who have decided that transparency between them is more useful than isolation. Andrea was going to confront Esteban in Canada. She already had an attorney. She had already started the separation process before contacting me because she had needed to move in that direction before having the conversation with him. I was going to cut all communication with Esteban without giving him an explanation before Andrea confronted him, so he would not have the opportunity to build a damage control narrative that reached me before the truth did. I sent Esteban a message on the day we agreed. It said only, "I know everything. Do not contact me." I blocked him. What happened on Andrea's side in the following days, she told me in messages over the subsequent weeks. The confrontation was exactly what you can imagine it was. Esteban tried first to deny, then to minimize, then to reframe, using the argument that his situation was complicated and that he had made wrong decisions in a difficult moment and that everything he did was because he loved his family. Andrea had an attorney. The conversation that mattered was not the one Esteban wanted to have. It was the one the legal documents were going to have over the following months. Andrea and I stayed in contact for several months afterward, not as friends in the sense built over time, but with the specific solidarity of two people who have survived the same situation from different angles and who have in that shared experience something that does not need more history to be real. We talk less now. Each of us is in her own process of reconstruction. She sent me a message 3 months ago telling me the divorce process was moving forward, that her children were okay, that she was okay. I responded that I was glad, and I meant it. What I took from his story has layers I'm still processing. The first is the most obvious. Long-distance relationships have specific vulnerabilities that in-person ones do not have. The impossibility of verifying the everyday. The dependence on the narrative the other person constructs because you do not have access to their life outside of what they show you. The way the intensity of in-person moments can cognitively compensate for the scarcity of real information. That does not mean long-distance relationships do not work. They work when they are honest. They do not work when the distance is the tool someone uses to sustain a double life. The second layer is harder to articulate. For a time after this happened, I asked myself what had failed in my perception, what I had ignored, what I should have seen. Over time, I arrived at an answer that feels more honest to me than blame. I did not fail in perception. I trusted the information I had. The problem was not my trust. It was that the information I had been carefully managed by someone whose main skill was managing information. That is not a failure of mine. It is a decision of his. And that distinction, which took me time to build, is what allows me to be okay now. If this story moved you, comment. Would you have responded to Andrea's message, or would you have ignored it? Like if you believe two women in the same situation owe each other honesty. Subscribe for more real stories. Share with someone who is in a long-distance relationship and needs to remember that trust has to be earned with transparency. Reflection to take with you. In long-distance relationships, the information you have about the other person's life is always the information that person chooses to give you. That is not reason to distrust everyone. It is reason to pay attention to patterns of opacity. When someone consistently answers questions about their everyday life with vagueness, that vagueness has information in itself.